Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely, and as always, for our Cloud News of the Month, our co-host, Brandon Witchert from Software Defined Talk. Brandon, how are things down in Austin, Texas?
They're fantastic. You know, it's November. The weather is great. My football teams are still in it. There hasn't been any tragic loss, so it's like I want to say at the end of the year, it's sort of like a lot of optimism in the beginning of November. Now check back. Yeah. We'll check back in December. This is usually the month where optimism is broken for many reasons, but like it's very great. The weather's great. Football's great. I'm excited to be on the Cloudcast, so let's do it.
Yeah, no, it's good. We're recording this on Halloween. This is going to publish on the 6th. So, right after the U.S. election, which if forecasts are what they are, we won't know who will win by then. But one thing we do know is podcasts have been a big deal for this election, which oddly, I guess we probably could have put in a request to get Trump or Harris on the show. What do you think their response would have been to the AWS return to work thing? How do you think if we had gotten him on here, that would have changed any votes about their take on the return to work for AWS?
Yeah, that is a fascinating question. Like, I guess it comes down where you would. I think, if you're trying to get more votes, you think both candidates would be like, yeah, I believe the people should work wherever they're most effective, and if that's at home, that's probably what it'd be, a lot of pandering, right? So I don't think you would change anything. Yeah. Now you could go, we've seen out of AWS lately, and their latest leader, right? He came out and said something like 9 out of 10 people he speaks to at AWS have all said they're excited to come back in the office. Like, what could possibly be wrong with that poll? Like, could we possibly think of some type of issue with the data collection that went on with that? But I felt like that was a very political answer he gave. I was like, well, I mean, there you have it. I'm sure 90% of the people at AWS want to come back. You've talked to 9 out of 10. So how could we possibly challenge your decision making is what I thought was one of the funniest things I've seen come out of that whole discourse over the last few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is interesting to watch that thing. Apparently there was some sort of petition that was signed by 500 people. I think you and I would probably look at that as 500 people who are putting their name on the list to get the package to not come back to work, most likely.
Yep, they've decided they want to move on at AWS. They're probably already over the 4-year vesting cycles. They're ready to move on.
That's right.
So it's also too, like, it does mess up the whole line. Now he's going to be like, well, 9 out of 10 people I talked to, but 500 people that send me letters have all said they don't want to come back to the office. So how do you put that into your poll? Right. I guess when you're talking about this going forward.
That's right. So before we dive into all the stuff for Cloud News of the Month for October, any immediate thoughts? We are in the middle of college football season. We have to sort of have our college football moment. What are your thoughts on the season? Are you optimistic about where we are? Are you any surprises for you? Anything you're looking forward to as we go into the last sort of month and a half of the season?
Well, we'll keep it brief because I know no one wants to hear us talk about American football. But I will say, though, this was the new year of the new playoff format. So for those people around the world, it seems crazy. We've had this crazy system before. But this year, 12 teams get to play in the playoff. And it's been widely debated whether this was a good or bad strategy. But I love it. I just think, like, as I would almost say it's like an American idea, is that we want to bring chaos to everything. And that's what we're about to embark on. It's like, It's going to be chaotic. Used to be only 4 teams got in. Now 12 teams get in. And it just means that you're going to have roughly 8 to 16 more groups of people arguing about who should be in and who should be out. And what is more American than that? Settling our sports by just arguing about it, weird statistics, weird win-loss records. It's going to be fantastic. If you're like me and you enjoy Palace Intrigue, and maybe we'll talk about some tech Palace Intrigue later today, it's like, I love it. So bring it on. We're going to watch the games, and then we're going to argue about them for several weeks. And really, that's how I like to spend my holiday season.
Yeah, no, it's been good. It does defy sort of all things that are becoming mainstream. Like, this is not being driven by data necessarily. We're going to have lots of teams with the exact same records, and yet we're going to somehow decide that some of them are more important than others. It's not exclusively being driven by the most, rich teams. There are a bunch of teams in here that are at least on the bubble, potentially could get in. So this would be the equivalent of like, somebody actually competing against AWS and cloud, or somebody competing against, NVIDIA and GPUs. So that's kind of fun. We're going to get to the end of this, and a whole bunch of teams are going to be like, no, statistically, I'm the exact same. And we're going to go, nope, no, no, you're not. You're just not good enough. And like you said, it all gets decided over Thanksgiving meals, which is, a great time for families to argue anyways. And, so yeah, no, it's perfect. The other thing I'll throw out before we dive into this, for those of you who are listening, our open-ended thing, if you have any quittings that you plan to do for this next month, any coups you plan to do on your company, if you're planning to take a new CEO role because you want to quit right after AWS reInvent, let us know. We'd be happy to highlight you on the show. We're kind of expecting this to happen as a new annual thing after the OpenAI thing. So we're just reminding folks, November is drama month, is chaos month. So we're excited about that next month. All right, man, let's get started. I feel like we're not gonna kind of go through all these things. Let's hit on a few things real quick. We're recording this on October 31st. This will publish on November 6th. AWS has not announced their numbers, but Microsoft and Google both did. Both numbers are relatively good. Google now $11 billion for the quarter, so call it a $40 billion company, up 35%. Microsoft somewhere between 22 and 25 billion, up about 21%. This is the first time they've sort of broken out their kind of official, sort of pseudo official Azure numbers. Anything surprise you there? I think the thing people are all trying to figure out is Amazon still cranking along, or has this AWS stuff sort of disrupted that apple cart? And unfortunately, we won't know that answer until after we hit record after this. But what are your thoughts on those announcements? Anything jump out at you?
The Google Cloud numbers jumped out at me. Like, they're up 35%, and the earnings, like, I guess, blew past expectations, which is not like unheard of, but like, I'm surprised. I was surprised to see, and of course that even moved the stock, even to the point of, like, we've long joked on this show and certainly on other podcasts I've been on about, like, is Google serious about cloud and things like that? But like, it's actually a business that is as big or bigger, depending on how you measure it, than YouTube, right? So it's gotten to the point of where it's like, it's significant. And when you look at the bar graphs, obviously, search is still like 50, 60% of this company. But then you get on there, like, Google Cloud is a line item now with YouTube and several other things. So I am surprised there, right? Because I feel like, I don't feel like I see it being adopted as much as this revenue implies. So I don't know if that's just like what I'm doing, right? It's like, am I just not in the right circles? And the other thing that I'm really interested in, I don't know, like, separating kind of truth from the story, is they went out of their way to say that, AI is helping drive larger cloud deals. And I just sort of come back to, like, is that really true? Like, is that really what people are buying? Because I think, as you know, and as we discussed many times, it's like, most of this revenue is going to be in, like, compute, storage, networking, kind of the building blocks, right?
Yep,
so,
yep.
So is it such that people are like, well, all that's kind of a commodity, but I really do want to be close to the AI models of Google? Like, I know that's the story the Google executives want to tell, but I just find myself skeptical of, like, what's going on there. Like, maybe people just wanted a third vendor, and maybe that's what's happening there. So we'll obviously be tracking this quarter by quarter, but next quarter, I'm really interested to see is it up again this much, and are they still referring to AI, or is that just a convenient story that you can tell about, like, oh, this is why people are buying?
Yeah. I think the thing that I hear as I talk to companies kind of out in the wild, and I've been traveling around a lot, is in the AI discussions. So, back in sort of the cloud discussions, it was typically like, hey, we're an AWS shop and we also use Azure for things, right? It was, and Google was kind of rarely ever mentioned. And, granted that sort of made sense from the dollars. In the AI space, it tends to be, we're doing stuff with Microsoft, a lot of the stuff we're on Copilots, and we're working with Google. And I get the sense that, like, there's a decent amount of, Google has had a tendency when they've been successful in places to be like, we will throw bodies at things for you, right? We will, like, you're going to consume stuff, but we will also throw a bunch of smart engineers to help you try and do some stuff. And I think, we've said for a long time, like, Google will probably end up being successful when the sort of AI data-centric stuff is the center of the conversation. So that may be part of what's going on. I do wonder, Google also for a while was talking about all the AI startups are using their cloud. So I do wonder how much of these numbers are, people are churning up stuff on the Google Cloud, but, as we've said with a lot of AI stuff, like, but are they actually making any money? So is this like sustainable things, or are these like I don't want to call it cyclical, but they're sort of AI hype cycle types of things. So yeah, those will be sort of interesting. Yeah, the Microsoft Cloud, I think they didn't break out sort of an AI number per se. They did say, hey, it's upticking. But it also does feel like, and we saw this with some of the announcements that came out of GitHub and the GitHub Universe event, Microsoft is now starting to hedge their bets, as we've said a number of times, around OpenAI, so that like GitHub Copilot now works with Claude and some of the other LLMs in terms of the back of it. So I think Microsoft, if you and I sat here a year ago and we were like, Microsoft's in the catbird seat, Satya is the smartest man on the planet. And I think if we're looking at this a year later, we're like, things are a little bit different over in Microsoft OpenAI, relationship land these days.
I agree with you. And I do think, credit to Microsoft for sort of like grabbing what was available. I think they sort of like got on the OpenAI train and maybe were the first to kind of, if you will, benefit from that AI kind of multiple that added to and now Google is doing something very similar. So, all eyes on AWS, right? In November, maybe getting to predictions ahead of ourselves, but like, obviously this is going to be the time of a reinvent, right? Everybody's going to be looking at AWS. What do they do? And, because these numbers, I think Google Cloud, really good. Microsoft Cloud, good, but kind of what we expected. I don't think this is not shocking. So what's going to be really interesting is like, how does AWS do and what does AWS say at reInvent to see if they can really establish themselves in this world of AI. I know they would say they've been doing it all along and they've had it but it's, reality is like, no, you're not perceived that way. So all eyes on that. And I think if there's a chance, if to dethrone AWS, like this is probably the best opportunity that's existed in like 7 years, right? To really go at AWS at a place that they are perceived weak.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's really interesting to me as I was thinking about reInvent. reInvent has gone from the thing where it was like, okay, what is the future going to look like when cloud was the future, and we were like, what are they going to do? How are they going to disrupt stuff? And now it feels like the sort of I don't even know the best way to explain it, but it doesn't feel like sort of setting the future. It feels like are they sort of the as far as the future goes, like, are they the number 3 cloud? And I think this is going to be a big deal because it doesn't feel like, from looking at like the catalog and stuff, the things they've published, it's going to be very AI heavy, but it does make you wonder, like, okay, if you're the number 1 cloud and you're the number 1 cloud by a lot, how much time are you going to spend talking about cloud stuff? Or do you feel like you're so far behind, like everything has to be about AI? So it'll be really, really interesting to watch that that'll be a very different us doing the commentary online as we're watching it, I think.
Yes, indeed.
The other sort of big thing around the cloud stuff that was sort of interesting to me, less about the cloud things, and it feels like this is sort of chips are having their moment, and they're having a lot of moments at the same time. So we had a number of things sort of in the chip space. You had obviously, I'm looking through the list. AMD and Intel, bitter rivals forever, are now partnering up against ARM. Yep. You've got RISC-V, which is sort of an alternative that I know that Matt Ray follows very closely. I don't follow as much, but has now sort of come to a standardization, and that is becoming sort of the alternative to ARM from a community perspective, and maybe a player in the lower cost end of what would look like an x86. You've got ARM canceling Qualcomm's license. Chips are having a very competitive moment these days, and it does make me wonder if it's an area that we should be spending more and more time on, or if it's just one of those things that, like, it all has to shake out behind the scenes, and then we'll buy whatever devices have the most. Like, is this something that anybody really has to care about, or is this really something that just the PC makers, the server makers, and the phone makers have to care about? And we're not really going to see. I think
chips are back, baby, is what I would say. I think I would say everyone has to care, because even inside of what you said there is, remember, all of the cloud vendors are building their own chips, right? For various reasons, right? So Amazon, Google, they all have their own chips, and they're all using some version of ARM. So going forward, I do think this is going to become an area, or is an area, of real competition. Like, who's going to basically build the best chips to do AI? I'm sure that'll be part of the Amazon announcement or AWS announcement. They'll have some new Graviton processor, and then who can do it at cost effectively, right? And then, of course, not on this list, but kind of related is, Microsoft bought like a whole nuclear power plant, right? Over, I guess, 3 Mile Island. They're getting that set up because it just shows you like incredible demand for power, incredible demand to use that power efficiently with the best chips going forward. So that's why I think and it is funny. That's sort of forced. I mean, really, it's like cats and dogs getting married or something. With Intel and AMD getting together, just tells you how serious this is, right? There are probably two companies that have not hated each other or sued each other more than those two, and they have sort of rallied together. It's like, if we got to keep this x86 going because we're under attack from everywhere. And then I think RISC-V, sort of like, we've been covering it a little bit on our other podcast, but it is interesting that, everything eventually becomes open. For a while, it was sort of like, oh, it's great, just license it from ARM. But now it's like, well, I don't want to do that. And now I think ARM canceling Qualcomm's license may, if you will, usher in yet another instruction set, like one that's more freely available. And again, in a few years, does RISC-V become like the place where the innovation is happening because people are tired of ARM, right? So it just sort of like, it kind of keeps, if you will, it's sort of like everyone's trying to like position themselves and kind of like make sure they have a license agreement. At the same time, everyone else is also simultaneously trying to build great chips. And then of course, we should throw in Apple, who's always, rolling out the latest and greatest chips. And if they were here, they would say something like, hey, you don't need all this data center stuff, right? We're going to be able to do it all locally on our great M series chips. So really a fascinating area. I think it is an area that sort of maybe many people think it's boring. I like it, but I do think it's, if you're building cloud workloads or running them, you should care about it. And then of course, the future of all these computers is going to be based on what these chip vendors decide to do.
Yeah, no, it is sort of fascinating when you think about like still how much runs on x86 and how much, I don't know, like to me, it feels like it kind of puts in perspective, like we think all the time about x86 workloads and how much they consume like sort of enterprise, business types of things. And then you're looking at all these other things going on and you're like, are those things primarily targeted at people that are actually going to move workloads, i.e. like hey, move them to ARM, or is there just so much other computing that's going on that we don't necessarily have a great way of like wrapping our brain around, the fact that computing is in every single aspect of what we do. And these other things are really trying to capture stuff that's going to be autonomous vehicles and AI and all sorts of other stuff. And I think there's a part of me that feels like I would love to get a picture of outside of your sort of enterprise x86, like, somebody draw me a map of what are the chips used in all these other things that, is driving such incredible sort of competition, consolidation, all that sort of stuff.
Well, certainly. I mean, I think it's worth
the other thing. Go ahead.
Just to finish it off, I was just going to say, just to like, to kind of set the stage here, I think the one thing we have a hard time conceptualizing is like just how big workloads are for AI. So it's like, because we hear these numbers like, oh, this is a new data center. In your mind, you're just like, oh, it's a data center. But you think yourself like, even a really large corporation, if you took all their x86 workloads, it's probably a tiny fraction of what it's taking, these massive GPUs running, 24/7, doing all this calculation. And you just think to yourself, like, that computing workload is just enormous. But we'll just kind of on this podcast, we'll be like, well, it's just they're just running that in a data center somewhere. And we don't like visually, if we saw like how much energy or just how big it was, we would be like, oh my God, that's enormous. So it's easy to just forget that, but that's probably where I think a lot of these workloads are happening today.
Yeah. No, and it makes it, I think the thing that always kind of puts it a little bit in perspective to me is that they are talking about the way to solve some of these problems are literally, firing up nuclear power plants, right? And I only put that into context because like our city and like our region here in North Carolina is powered by, one of the Duke Power, nuclear power plants. So we drive by it, every few days and so forth. And you're like, oh no, that powers an entire city, right? Like one of the largest, probably top 40 or 50 cities in the country. And they're, that's becoming top of mind again. So the other question I'd have for you, because you've done plenty of product management work. What do you do if you're the NVIDIA Blackwell product manager and all your chips are sold out for the next 12 months? Like, are you just kind of on vacation for like, what do you do when all of your inventory is sold out for, obviously the product managers are trying to figure out how to build the what's next, but are the sales guys just like, now we're done? Or is this, is the thing we should cover, sort of try and figure out a way to cover the black market that's going to happen for these things. Like, is there a black market for them? Is it just simply they're being sold to, Alphabet saying they're going to raise their CapEx by 60% next? I mean, are these really just going to the top 5 or 6 companies, and nobody else is going to see them?
I have thought about this so much. Like, if you're a salesperson at NVIDIA, like, is this like the greatest moment of your life? Like, I mean, literally everything's been sold. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it works the opposite. Is like, because everything's been sold, like, they just don't need you anymore. They just sort of get rid of it. They just only have a few salespeople, and they're just like, yeah, we just take orders. But what I would guess that they're doing is they just moved to the next one, right? I can't remember, was it Blackwell 2 or whatever the next thing is called. It's like, and they're just looking at companies like, hey, if you like, you got to prepay, right? You got to prepay right now if you even want to have a chance in getting our next thing. And if you don't, like, I'm literally leaving this building right now and I'm going across the street, and they're going to buy all of these chips that don't even exist in the future, right? Like, and so it's just really up to like the NVIDIA CFO, like how much is he going to let them sell that doesn't even exist yet? Like, literally just put on the books is like, yeah, we've sold out for the next 3 years. Because I think at this point, there seems to be no end in sight, right? Like, it's just, whether or not all of this is needed or necessary. I mean, for the next 2 to 4 years, it seems like NVIDIA, at least from a sales perspective, like, they will have sold everything they possibly can make. And it's only up to them to decide at what margin do they determine is enough. I mean, there's like nothing else to do. So it's incredible. It's an incredible moment for them.
Yeah. I would love to hear like a 3 or 4 hour Acquired podcast about how involved NVIDIA is getting in the secondary market or black market for GPUs, and not necessarily like the Blackwell ones, but like the H100s, the A100s, the stuff that's like one generation behind, like, because so much of Jensen's shtick these days, and the thing that's driving the stock price up, is him essentially being like, if you are 1 month behind the latest frontier model, you're essentially nothing. You don't exist. You don't matter.
Useless,
and so
right? Uh-huh.
And there's got to be tons of people that are trying to figure out, like, all right, I have these interesting ideas, but I'm not on the list of 5 or 6 companies that are getting the latest and greatest. Like, how can I go about acquiring enough, H100s? How can I start to get creative, and can I do stuff on the AMD chips? And like, I would love a deep dive on sort of the secondary market, the one generation behind GPUs. Like, where are they? How are they being used? Is somebody trying to hoard them? All that kind of stuff, I think would be sort of fascinating, because I know I only bring that up because back in the day when I was at Cisco and the early internet stuff was going on, and people were, trying to build out pets.com and all that kind of stuff. Like, we had a humongous team of people trying to figure out what the gray market looked like. And, we had all these startups who we had sold them tons of networking gear, and then some of them would go out of business, and we were like, okay, well, what happened to that stuff? Where did it go? Is it over this other place? And so that would be fascinating to sort of see how that works, especially given, how much sort of latest and greatest Jensen's story is entirely based on, right? Like, you have to be within a minute of the latest, otherwise you're toast.
Otherwise you're done. No, good, really good questions. I don't know. I think they must have somebody there, and it'd be interesting to know what the license agreements are. Like, when you buy one of these, maybe it's like only, I would imagine they can just set any terms they want. Maybe it's like only you can use it, and it cannot be resold, and if you want to, get rid of it, you have to like call us and we buy it back at like a fraction of the cost, or like do something like that to like probably control access. Like, so I bet you there's, I haven't been involved. I'm not buying these things, but something like that must exist.
Right. Like, do they have Oracle level auditors, or do they just have sort of like, friendly salespeople auditors? How does all that work? Next big thing seems to be this last month was all about the big AI companies asking for just obscene amounts of money. I mean, you've got OpenAI raising $6.5 billion at $150 billion valuation. Perplexity, who's trying to build the search engine, trying to raise $8 billion. You've got Anthropic writing this love letter to the future of AI, which means they must be trying to keep up. Like, I don't even know how much they're asking for. But the other insane piece of this is, like, they all seem to be like, normally when we're tracking these huge VC funding rounds, you're like, okay, that's going to carry them for 2 to 3 years, and they may not actually need the money, but they're just taking the money as a defensive thing. These guys feel like they're taking an amount of money that may not get them through the next year. which is, just given the cost of the size of these models they're building, like that to me is fascinating. Like it just feels like a different set of equations than we've ever seen in terms of VC funding, because like they don't have a runway per se. Like their runway is so short based on how much they're burning through GPU costs and so forth. I mean, it's fascinating to watch, but it just, like, the math doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, the way I think of it is like kind of picking up our last topic, was sort of like, well, most of this money we can say is going to NVIDIA, and we can see NVIDIA is like roughly worth $3 trillion, right? And so they are sort of like, if you will, they're really not taking any risk. Like they have the thing everyone wants, and they're just cashing in right this very minute, right? So then on top of that, we then have, all the ones you just mentioned, OpenAI and others, who are basically building these businesses. So let's just say they're worth valued at somewhere between $50 to $100 billion, depending on what it is, right? But if you think about the people funding this, it's really more like in the stocks, like a call option. You're like, listen, we're going to value at $100 billion, but what we think could happen, right, is we think you could be a $1 trillion company, a $5 trillion company, a $10 trillion company. And that's where that love letter you kind of described, who wrote it again? It was from, which company wrote that one?
Anthropic.
Anthropic, right?
Anthropic.
So they're painting this picture of like, if all of this actually happened, right? And I think you covered it on the podcast. You're like, I don't even know what this company, it's like $10 billion or $10 trillion may be, I can't believe I'm saying this. $10 trillion may actually undervalue if everything they said in this came true. And I think this is just like the richest people in the world playing the most expensive game of poker of all time. But you're just like, well, I'm trying to make trillions of dollars. So the way you do it is I'm going to give you billions of dollars, and I'm going to incent you, because we're just going to call it worth $100 billion of like magic money. But we all know, and what we're betting on is that you ultimately deliver these things. And so NVIDIA at the bottom, they're sort of getting all the cash. They actually have cash in the bank, as we just talked about. You've got kind of these AI companies that are all like prophesizing these future things. And then you have the VCs and large hyperscalers investing in them, all hoping that this eventually hits on the next $10 trillion company. And it's like, who knows if any of this was happening? Because I heard your podcast the other week, and it's like, when you kind of take in some of the ideas, you're like, I think it was something like human life could be expanded. Like, I don't know, like we could all live to be like 150 years old or something. Right. And it was like, it's like hard to even like comprehend that, because our lived reality is like, we've never seen anything like that during our lifetime. We've seen incremental improvements in healthcare and things like that. So on one hand, it's like, seems totally crazy. Seems like tech people just being nuts again. But then I did have this experience this weekend driving around with my family, and a Waymo passed us, the actual Waymo. So it just came to Austin. Yeah. So like, I know everyone in San Francisco is like, I've seen it. What are you talking about? It's boring. But like, at least here in Austin, like completely new. And my wife, who does not care at all about technology, just is sort of like, and I was like, check it out. The car's, there's no one in the car. It's driving itself. It's just like going off to like do a pickup, I guess. And I was like, it's incredible. Like, it's like, we talked about self-driving cars for so long, and like, sure enough, here's one driving around Austin that, I was very skeptical it would ever happen, and who knows if it'll ever happen in a big way. But there is kind of these moments of like being skeptical, but also being like, well, some of the stuff is actually coming true. So I think as an investor, those people are just sort of like, we have a ton of money to bet, and we're going to bet that it happens. And if it doesn't work out, it's like really rich people will have slightly less money. So it's just like, okay, it doesn't seem like a huge downside, right? It's not like they're going all in with their whole lives. So I think that's kind of like, to me, that's what I think is going to ultimately, or that's kind of how I see the economics working.
Yeah. I think that the thing that's fascinating to me, and again, I'm a little bit like you, it's hard to wrap your head around some of these things that the CEOs just sort of like make out as like, oh yeah, it could just happen. Like mankind could just live twice as long as they do today, as if it's like what are you like? Do you realize like what that would mean? Right. And they just sort of write it off like, yeah, I can envision that happening. But the other part of it, from like a reality perspective, is you're like, okay, that's fine. Like, we still don't have flying cars, but thanks a lot, guys. I'm glad we're all going to live to 150 years old. But the other piece of this is I look at this and I go, okay, like to get to that kind of valuation, like let's just say, for example, you're like, okay, one of the things that will come out of one of these super unbelievable model companies is, somebody who corners the market in creating, sort of life-saving drugs, right? ALS cures, cancer cures, all these sort of things. Like, this is the piece where I'm kind of like, well, that stuff's been out there now for 2 years. Like, who is OpenAI expected to be the company that invents the application that, or the whatever they end up calling it, that finds the cure for cancer? Or is there an expectation that there's like, a bunch of PhDs at Johns Hopkins right now that have been working on cancer cures, and they're just now like, oh, wait a second, these things are unlocked for me. Like, what's the name of that company? Like, I feel like we don't know. It's been out there for a couple of years, and really kind of all we have is ChatGPT. And I know ChatGPT is kind of getting some new features and so forth, but that's the other piece of the disconnect that I'm like, well, who is the expectation that like Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever is also going to be the company that revolutionizes healthcare or revolutionizes government, whatever? Or are they just going to be the makers of these great models, and they're kind of living behind, they're sort of the equivalent of like, hey, we're doing primitives, like AWS did primitives for cloud, and everybody else has to build on top of that. But I just feel like I'm like, well, where are the couple of companies, the way that AWS used to have Netflix show up in their keynote, like,
Right.
Who's showed up at the OpenAI keynote? Like, and that's the piece that I'm kind of like, you have these giant expectations, you've sold these giant expectations, but like, who's the execution? Where's the execution arm of this thing? Because I don't think, you guys have come up with one application. But I mean, is that it, or is is it just we're not looking at what else is happening around the ecosystem? That's the piece I just don't feel like I have visibility for.
Well, I guess two quick thoughts on that. I think one, it's like, well, what's investable now? It's like, if you've just like, everyone has this money and they want to invest in it. It's like, hey, like, we don't know what we don't know, and we can't invest in just like literally what doesn't exist, because there's no one, kind of figuring it out. So I think one answer to that question is like, yeah, the models, it's not the scientists using the models, it's the models themselves, right? Sort of like figure this stuff out. So with some training and things like that, is that the model can actually go out and start to create these cures kind of on its own. So you don't need a group of people like sort of like using the model does it itself. So if you believed in that, you would invest in the AI companies, because like that's what's going to actually quote unquote do the work. And then on the other side is like getting beyond the text stuff, kind of back to my last example, would be like, well, for transportation, right? I guess the places you would invest today would be like Uber, Waymo, right? You're like, okay, AI is figuring this out,
Tesla,
and that's going to completely change transportation, right? So that would be like one place. You're like, that's going to be the execution for that. And then you'd have to go vertical industry by vertical industry. Is like, is some company, maybe realtors are next or something like that. Like, where's the next area you kind of have to find? But that's what, I mean, really hard, right? I mean, again, like, you got to have a lot of expendable cash to do this. Like, you got to have like a risk tolerance like no other, because you're going to miss on a bunch of them. And there may be one, and maybe the other one, just to mention quickly, is like, there's all this talk, like, Facebook's doing, or Meta, is doing very well. And one of the thoughts that they're kind of moving to is like, maybe just, AI generated content, right? So that's another place to be like, get away from social networks. It's actually all of this entertainment will just be. So maybe that is investing in like a Netflix or a YouTube or someone that's just going to like create the content for you. Again, all highly speculative. I'm not saying any of this is going to happen. If I knew, I would I would figure it out.
Yeah. You'd be making the right bets and everything. I guess like the way I connect the dots on this to where I'm not seeing it is like, let's take the Waymo example, right? So Waymo's going after, the transportation vertical. Maybe they're going after, replacing cabs. Maybe they're going after replacing, trucks in the future, or just, they just want to be the replacement for everybody automobile. Like, cool. But they're building their own models. Like, they're not like Netflix, where they're like, well, we could have built our own model, we could have built our own cloud, but we're building this on AWS. Like, Waymo's not like, oh no, we've been building this on Google Gemini, and they just gave us, nearly $6 billion in funding. We're building this in Gemini. They're like, no, we built our own thing. And, Tesla announced the Cybercab, it's supposed to come out sometime in 2025. like I assume they're building that on a Tesla, Grok 1 or,
building a model,
Cybercab
right?
1 like, right. Like that this is where I'm kind of coming back to, like, who is the Netflix for OpenAI, or is that not their business model? They're like, no, we're, we understand this stuff so much better than everybody. And, we're just going to need like a healthcare data scientist to, kind of come and join us, or like, that's the piece that I'm not yet seeing. And again, what, I might have my timelines off. Cause I guess if we said, well, hey, if you went to AWS, they launched in 2006, 2007, and you went to the event in 2000 and, even 9 or 10, you were like, well, maybe, did Netflix even show up then? Or were they still just like, hey, your IT, organization sucks. You should come to us because we're cheaper and the storage prices. Like, I got to sort of think about like timing wise, like maybe we're just too early in the process before, the Netflix of OpenAI comes along. So
well, just
still,
a couple quick thoughts
kind of
there.
Throwing me off.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's like, I think what you're getting at is like the big question is like, is the model itself the value, right? Or is it people applying the model? And we just right. outlined two different examples, right? And you just kind of said, it's like, well, yeah, in the case of Waymo, it's really, they built their own thing, right? So in that case, all the value is there. And like, I think, Anthropic and others would be like, no, the model is going to be so capable of doing like everything, right? That it will just all happen on its own. So we'll see there. And I do think, the last thought to kind of have on this is like, there's a phrase I like to think of, like, it's like the Mark Benioff, the Benioff line, right? Because like when you listen to a Mark Benioff interview, right? And he talks about the future of like medicine and healthcare and just all of this stuff happening together. It's interesting. He brings up like really cool ideas. You're like, this is a world I'd like to live in. Okay, then later, after you listen to the podcast interview and you have to go do your job, you log into Salesforce and you're like, this is the most god-awful piece of software I've ever used. I can't find any data in it. I can't get any reports out of it. Right. It does not tell me anything. Right. I have to go find the Salesforce admin to even get access to the data, to maybe get a CSV, to maybe build a chart that sort of has accurate data so I could kind of present it to the group that I need to. And you're like, there is nothing automated about it, right? And this is the man, he owns both companies, right? This is my only question to him at the end of the call. I was like, do you actually log into Salesforce? Can you make sense of it? Like, where are the Salesforce agents? Where is anything that makes Salesforce better? And don't even get me started on Slack, which I like, which I use, which at the end of the show, I'm going to tell you to go sign up for the Software Defined Talk Slack. But it's like, there's no AI in Slack. Like, you'll be lucky if a Slack thread on a big thread will even load so you can read it all. And it's like, that Benioff line we all live in, right? It's like, okay, I hear about the future, but my lived reality is I don't see any of this stuff. And you're the one that is actually building them. So that's, I think we just have to like both be, if you will, optimistic. Like I said, like you have to kind of like write down the moments when the Waymo passes you on the road, you're like, real progress is being made. That was cool. 10 years ago, that was not happening. At the same time, we've been doing this a long time. We have seen many fads come and go, right? And be like, this is never, you know what I mean? It is not happening. So, and that's just like the fun part of technology, the good and the bad.
Right. Yeah. And that's the piece that and I did that show this past Sunday. Like, the intention was not to be like, oh, this stuff is all crap and I don't believe, that things won't get better and all that. But there is a part of me that's like, once you've lived through a couple of these things and you've lived through a few of them that were supposed to be enormous, and they went through a period where they failed miserably, and then they sort of figured out, what was viable and all that. Like, there's a part of me that's just trying to draw analogies. And again, like, drawing the analogies might be a terrible thing to do, but like, as you were telling me the Waymo thing, there's a part of me going, should I look at that as being like, kind of like the first time you went to Yahoo and did a search on Yahoo and you were like, oh, there's lots of stuff out there on this thing called the internet. I had no idea that it was all out there. That's amazing. Like, how did this all happen? How did this one company figure out what was going on in the world without even asking everybody, like, what do you have going on in your website? Or like, is that a terrible analogy? Because, is that a really basic thing that we should just expect will happen? Or is this an unbelievable thing that we should be like, oh, no, that's a pinnacle. Like, that might be as far as we get. I don't know what the right answer is, but to your point, it's like, we don't know the answers. And we're trying to figure out, how far along are we, I'm going to leave it with one last thing because we're kind of running along in the tooth. Have you seen this thing, Notebook ML? This thing that Google launched?
Yeah, this is the one that makes podcasts.
Have you heard of
or
it?
Is this, well, no, which one is this?
Yeah.
Maybe I haven't. Is that this is the podcast one, right?
This is the one that you can. This is the this is the one that you can you can dump all sorts of stuff into it, and it'll give you summaries and stuff. But yeah, it can make podcasts. I'm curious. There's a part of me that's almost like I want to just start dumping every single one of our podcasts and maybe just the transcripts of the podcast into it, make its own feed, and see which one is more popular, the actual Cloudcast or the Cloudcast AI version that summarizes stuff. Because I know for Aaron and I, we get some benefit out of learning this stuff and meeting all these people, but thinking about this, I'm like, maybe everybody just wants the TLDR version of the Cloudcast. Just give Brian and Brandon stuff summarized in 10 or 15 minutes. So I think I'm going to do that just as an experiment and sort of see how it goes. Because the stuff I've seen from it is kind of interesting. I don't look at it as putting us out of business, but I do look at it as maybe it's a useful companion to the show.
Well, I think so for sure, and I think
I don't know.
many of the subjects we won't get to today, but let's just take the Dora report. We did an episode. On Software Defined Talk. We spent a bunch of time talking about it. But one of the things I do with all these reports is I now put them through Anthropic or ChatGPT and hey, kind of what are the highlights they see, and then I see some of the highlights there. But I prefer like to listen to audio, so it's sort of take this. I think that report was over 100 pages. Take this 100 pages and give me 30 minutes of the best stuff out of this report, and I'm going to listen to this while I walk my dog, right? Because that's where I just like to take in information. So I think it's cool. I think it's a good idea, and I think stuff like that. And then of course, hopefully it doesn't replace all of us. They can't replace our dynamic personalities and our beautiful voices, but you never know. Maybe it will though.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is it doesn't appear to have any way of monetizing it. So it is on the list of things that Google will likely chop at some point. So I figure even if we put it out there all the time, it probably won't put us out of business because at some point Google will kill it off. But it'll be a fun experiment to sort of see.
We should do it. Maybe we should do it. We should all maybe we should collaborate on a Christmas episode because everyone's busy and everyone just load up a bunch of stuff and then be well, here's an episode of stuff we would have talked about, but we're all on vacation, so we're gonna let Notebook ML do it. Let us know if you liked it, right? See if it was fun or not.
Yeah, that's right. All right, man. Well, thank you again for being on. I think we covered a lot of stuff. Next month, obviously, we've got both the fallout of whatever the U.S. election will be. Well, who knows when that'll ever get if that'll get finalized. The odds of it finalizing on the 5th or the 6th are probably close to zero, given our recent track record. But we've got the U.S. election coming up. We've got AWS reInvent coming up. We've got the Thanksgiving surprise from maybe OpenAI or somebody else. So I suspect we will have a lot to talk about the next time you are on. For folks that haven't listened, where's the best place to check out all things good Software Defined Talk?
Just go to softwaredefinedtalk.com. We got everything. You can subscribe. Excuse me. Subscribe to the podcast. Find us on all the social feeds. Join us in the Slack. So come listen. We need more listeners.
Smash the like button.
Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff, man. Well, all right. Listen, we got a month and a half of football still left. That's all good. The leaves are changing. That's good. The weather's good in the South. It's not too hot or not too cold. So, thank you for being on, man. Thanks everybody for listening. Guys, we will be back. Well, we'll be back again next week. Brandon will be back hopefully again next month to sort of recap what went on. But thanks you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.